This is the reading guide for Friday. You have two things to read. First, you have a chapter in Running a Museum Practical Handbook called Care and Preservation of Collections, and then you have the collections assignment guidelines. So starting with this chapter here, always read the background to get yourself oriented to the chapter. Focus here on the two fundamental problems of collection preservation. In this section here, I want you to think about what is risk in a museum collections context. What is the time frame for considering risk? And actually, let me back up for a second here and give you a little background. You're reading this chapter because you're going to do an assessment of your collection. So keep this in mind as you read. Take notes and highlight so you'll be prepared to go in on Friday into your collections and start assessing. Okay, so back to this section here. They introduce the object viewpoint for classifying risks, know what that is, and then they introduce the 9 agents of deterioration. You're going to get very familiar with these. So this is your first exposure to them here. Okay, they're going to talk about the difference between risk and hazard and give you some great examples to help you remember what that is. You're going to want to know that difference very well. It should become very natural to you. Here they point out teamwork, and seriously, Table 1 has a whole section in it. Table 1 about the 9 agents of deterioration has a whole section in it about who is related, who is involved with the different agents, right? So here are all the people that are involved in making sure that this risk is not a huge problem. So teamwork is critical for preserving collections. And the original document did not have the second page of Table 1, so I've scanned it and given it to you. This case history here is fantastic. In fact, they do a whole bunch of examples in this chapter that I really like. Learning through examples is a great way to learn. So read these examples really carefully and highlight the points that you think you should be taking home from them. Who do you think takes charge of the collections at the museum, at our Joseph Moore Museum? Keep our museum in mind to help you be really actively reading. You know that we have a director, we have a collections manager, we have an education coordinator, we have students who work in the collections. You know from looking at the flow chart of specimen movement, when students are doing things, when faculty are doing things. So think about that as you're reading through here. Okay, here's a figure. You know I like figures. Note that this is a cycle, not a straight line. They point that out quite a bit, that collections preservation is a cycle, not a start and end point. Sections 1 through 3 in here are a data collection portion of the cycle. You're going to be doing a lot of that, so you'll be in the first couple of sections of the cycle. Okay, they're going to talk to you about different types of surveys that will be done, or that can be done, so read about that. Okay, here they tell you about the context, the historical context. How has collections work changed in the last 100 years? This is a great thing to read about. And then they're going to go through and give you a list of steps. Start with the basics, okay? This is, for some reason, whatever, okay? And they give you these basics, okay? And what I want you to do, which I've asked you to do many times when you get lists like this, put this into your own words, okay? So for number 1, go ahead and write out roof, right? Number 1 is just a roof. Number 2 is, building structure. Number 3 is order, cleanliness, something like that. So put this into your own very few words so that you have your own outline of this. Okay, they explain these basic items a little bit more detail, and then each of these figures is an example illustrating a point they think is so important that they have a figure. Remember, I like to use figures and have you tell me about them when I hide the legends for you. Okay, in the text, as soon as they mention a figure, go right to that figure, read the legend, examine it, figure out why it's so important that they've chosen to take up that space with a big picture. Step number 2 is to do a survey. So think about when you do a survey and how long it takes, what you're looking for. Okay. Now over here they talk about the difference between fact and opinion. Pay close attention to that. You should know this from science classes. When you have data versus interpretation, it's the same thing here. There are two different types, sources of your facts, visible and invisible. You're going to largely be responsible for visible facts because invisible requires knowing the history of the museum. And because you haven't been in the museum for that long, you wouldn't know the history necessarily, and you also won't be able to really interview that many people in the museum, so you wouldn't be able to gather that history as well. So you're mostly going to be doing visible facts, but you need to know what invisible facts are and how you would get to them. Here's a whole section on taking pictures. Why do you take pictures when you could just walk around? What are the pictures useful for? You'll be taking pictures of your collection, so you want to focus in on this so you know what your purpose is when you're doing that. Here is this nested layers around your collection. So your specimens or artifacts here are inside of their cases. They're supported on a shelf or a tray. They're inside of the case, which is the fitting. Then they're inside of a collection room. Then they're inside of a building, and then they're situated on a site, right, in the building. Oops. So the building is situated on a site. So each of these needs to be examined for the assessment of your collection. It's a great figure. So down here, they start talking about invisible facts, right? And this is going to be hard for you to do in our collection, but I want you to know what this is, and you can look for some evidence of this, right? Do staff eat food in the storage areas? Well, do you see bowls and spoons sitting around? That could be evidence that people are eating there. Okay. Over here in this section, I want you to be thinking about the heavy use of our collections in classes and the training that student workers get, and what kind of risk does that propose, and how do we minimize those risks? How do you think we can or should or do minimize those risks? This describes a great system for assessing risk, for quantifying it really, and I like things that can give you numbers, and so I want you to familiarize yourself with this so you'll be able to do an example of prioritizing once you've looked at collecting information on risks in your own collections. There's a table on the next page which makes this even better, more easy to understand. So I really like this. I think this is a great system. Step 3 is to plan improvements to collection risk management. I want you to look at these stages here, and I could see an exam question on that. What are the difference between the first 4 steps and the 5th? But keep in mind that you are, for the most part, probably not going to be proposing and prioritizing exactly what to do in your collections. You're largely going to be collecting data. Okay, they're going to point out many times throughout this chapter the social context in museums and how important that is. You can't just sit behind the scenes as a collections manager. You need to be an advocate for your collections, and you need to work well with the other people around you. I want you to look at this section here and note, how is cleaning a risk? How important is training for housekeeping? Okay, keep going. They're going to point out down here that you can solve multiple problems at once and how that can help stretch limited resources. That's important. There are more implications of teamwork throughout here, and then they do talk about installing sprinklers. I want to remind you that Lindley Hall was the building that our museum was in before the current museum building. It burned to the ground in 1924. There were no water sprinklers in that building, no fire suppression system. So take a look around you in our museum now and look for evidence of fire suppression. Okay. Now they start talking about integrated systems over here, and I want you to pay attention to the challenge of integrated systems. How can you make integrated systems successful? Then they introduce the idea of sustainability. How is that word applicable to museum collections? It's a different context than you might have encountered that word in before. They're going to point out again how assessment is a cycle, not a straight line. Think about that as you're reading here. Okay, examples. This is an example, just one for one room and one risk. This is a great example though, so read through that and that will help you get prepared for the data gathering you'll be doing. They're going to go through refining your estimates. This is great. These are all great examples that demonstrate the complexity of assessment the need for careful thought and evaluation and reevaluation. These may be examples about cultural objects, but they apply just as well to biological specimens. Feather and fur pigments, they fade. So this is really important. Over here, I want you to be thinking about the handling rates in our museum and what might you propose then, figure 10 versus 11, in a collection with a lot of handling. Over here, they start talking about proofed fluctuation. See if I can find it. Proofed fluctuation of the collection. What is that? And especially, how is it related to what they call a very powerful benchmark for risk assessment? Over here, they point out there's no advantage for exaggerating perfection of your past control, climate control. Whatever happened, happened, and now you need to move on and use that data. I especially like this really positive spin down here. The greater the known risks in the past, the smaller the assessed risks for the future. Here we have some exercises, and throughout this chapter there are exercises. They are great thought exercises. These are in here to help you evaluate, did you learn what you were supposed to learn after reading through this section? Can you answer this question? So I want you to attempt to, I want you to think through these exercises for a few minutes, go back to table 1, look at the agent of relative humidity. What are the 3 types? And think about them. How do they really affect specimens? Okay, now at this point I was getting quite tired, and I think that we should just stop right here. So finish up through this exercise here, and we'll move into integrated pest management later in this unit. So stay calm. You can stop here, and actually what I'm going to tell you now is skip ahead instead. Keep going until you get into the appendix. Here we are into the appendix 1. And they're going to start talking about how to do a survey. Set your survey path, do a basic set of observations and photographs. You're going to do this on Friday. So using this and the Appendix D, you're going to start your assessment, your data gathering. So read through this, and you're going to pay, of course, special attention to your collection rooms, but I also want you to do what they're saying here. Walk around the site, just the site right by your collection. So basically just the window and wall outside of your collection. So look at the building perimeter just outside your collection, okay? We're going to try to narrow in on your collection rather than have you try to do something that encompasses all of the museum or all of the collections. Look at doors and windows, walk around, take pictures of things. They tell you what to do. Don't worry about non-collection rooms. Ignore that section there. In the collection rooms, I really want you to be stepping back, looking, taking everything into your mind and into context here. You're going to collect these types of information. Fittings, this is where you start looking at cabinets, cases, and shelves. You're going to do that. Keep going through here. You're going to keep going through here and doing all these things, and that's about it. But I want to, so that's what you're going to do on Friday. You're going to go through and do that, and then over here you have Appendix D. This is from the Collections Assessment Program's guidelines for the assessors. So what is the Collection Assessment Program? Here it is. The Collection Assessment Program is something that where museums apply to receive this help, where a professional assessor comes in and looks through their collection. The assessor has all of this information available to them, including Appendix D. So when you get into Appendix D, you're going to see what these assessors are looking for, right? What are they evaluating? Summary, their information, staffing. And here's where you're going to start on Friday, right? So general building and facilities. So like you did with the other appendix, basically the same thing is listed in here. So a lot of this is overlap, and that's just fine. I just want you to look at this so you can see what the assessors are doing. Our museum has an application all ready to go for the October 1st deadline, so we are ready to do a collections assessment at the Joseph Moore Museum. So I want you to get an idea of what will happen when those people come in and do our assessment. Okay, that's pretty good for Friday.